Hello, my name's Debbie. I live in the UK. I am married to Gary. We're both self-employed healthcare professionals. We have 2 children. Our eldest has just finished his first year at university, and our youngest daughter is in her final year of school. I have been working with Anne for a number of years, and in actual fact was pretty convinced I had everything in place. I joined Wealth Builders because I realized that I wasn't being honest about our net worth number, and in actual fact I knew it wasn't the whole picture. And had always spoken about being brave enough to shine a torch in all the corners of your finances. And I had done that. I had done that with our personal finances, and I'd certainly done that with my business finances. But it felt like our money was like a large house that had many extensions that had been added on ad hoc. They didn't quite tie together, there wasn't an overall plan, and there certainly wasn't a vision that had been established at the outset. It was almost as if there was a long corridor down this property home, this money home, that had many doors that were very difficult to go into, especially if some of those money stories were joint with my husband, and that was tricky for us to talk about and to manage, as we both have 2 very different money stories. So when Wealth Builders came up, I realized that this was my opportunity to really get clear on all of the numbers, but that I needed the help of somebody neutral. And so my first goal was to find out our true net worth number. And I spent a very long time gathering all the numbers and putting them onto one large balance sheet. And I remember clearly the phone call with Maxine when I presented this to her. She very gently said to me that it wasn't a good idea. It wasn't really the dumb thing to mix your business numbers with your personal numbers. And I explained to Maxine very clearly that for Gary and I, we both worked out of the same business. It was only Gary and myself who generated the money to pay for the liabilities. And in a summary to Maxine, I said, but this feels like my lived experience. And Maxine very kindly said to me that was okay, and that as long as it was true for me and was meaningful to me, then that would be fine. But I put down the call, and I absolutely knew that it wasn't fine, that there was a better way to do it. And I rehashed the numbers again. And the story was complicated. It involved SIPs with commercial property. It involved holding companies and limited companies and properties in our personal name and properties in a limited company. And all the money flowed in and out of only 1 or 2 bank accounts. It was a spaghetti junction of note. And so I started off by drawing it, and I'm not sure if you can see, but this was my first attempt, and really just started by creating a story about what went where, and then I refined it again. I don't know if you can see, but to another story, and until eventually I got the flow really clear in my head. And eventually on my next call, I went back to Maxine and presented 3 separate balance sheets, one for personal, one for the limited company, and one for the businesses. And it was such a eureka moment, because the backstory to trying to get this net worth number was also because, Anne always talks about you either fall into 2 camps with insurances. You either don't have enough or you have way too much. And I think we had 10 policies, probably costing us not too much from £1,000 a month. And it was because all of these liabilities just felt so overwhelming. But when I had the 3 balance sheets in front of me, I suddenly realized that if something happened to Gary or myself, the work numbers would take care of themselves. Nothing needed doing there. That the property in the limited company would just carry on and take care of itself. And that in actual fact, there were only 1 or 2 items that really needed an insurance to cover for. And as a result of that, we cancelled a whole heap of insurances and liberated ourselves, not only from the money, but also just from that burden of not knowing and feeling overwhelmed. But in actual fact, that's not the only reason why I wanted to talk to you today. I wanted to also one of my biggest gains, I think, was something that I never planned for. And a couple of months ago, into my inbox popped an email from my daughter's school asking if somebody could come and talk to them about budgeting. Now, this is to a group, 150 17-year-olds who are entering their last year of school before they head out into the big world. And I looked at this email and I thought, budgeting, well, you can't teach teenagers about budgeting unless they have a big why, because I know teenagers, they if it doesn't work, if they don't have a why, they're not doing it. And so I impulsively sent this email back talking about, well, you'll have to talk about their why, you'll have to talk about money flows, you'll have to talk about debt, how they manage, about wealth and setting goals. And I never in my wildest dreams thought that this would come to anything. I thought that there would be somebody infinitely more qualified than myself to deliver on this. But a couple of weeks later, the email came back to say that they would love me to do this. I was terrified. I was terrified that I wasn't qualified enough. I was terrified I would let my daughter down. I was just overwhelmed and terrified. I thought, who was I to do this talk? But in the end, I went on the day and there were 3 groups of 50 young women in front of me. And I looked at them and I thought, imagine if somebody had told me this when I was 17. And with that in the forefront of my mind, I set forth. And the first talk went really well, and I did the talk on money matters. I spoke about the fact that I didn't come out of a finance world at all. I spoke about my money story and tried to get them to think about their money stories that will already be starting. We spoke about that it was absolutely their responsibility as young women to take care of their money and not to be, not to know that it was their responsibility, to know that it wasn't hard and that if I could learn about it, so could they. I spoke about wealth and what that really means and how we're influenced by so many of the stories and marketing and our parents and culture. We spoke about money flows. We spoke about that they're allowed to keep some of the money that they make. We spoke about their big why and what they would want to achieve and how it would change over time. And we spoke about the actual how they would set their accounts up and what money they would put where. We spoke about assets and what that looks like. We spoke about liabilities and debt. We spoke about how they're going to be absolutely targeted by the financial industry as soon as they start to earn money and how they needed to really arm themselves for that. And the strangest thing happened was that when I went into the talk for the second round, the back half of the classroom or the hall got filled up with all of these teachers. And on the third talk, there were even more teachers and then some of the speakers that were doing some of the other talks on the day. And then I got feedback to say that the talk had been exceptionally well received, and could I please, the girls had requested to please come back next year for a follow-up talk. And in actual fact, for me, it was my biggest gain of the year. I never in my wildest dreams thought I could could have stood in front of those 150 young women to empower them with that knowledge. And I couldn't have done that without the support of Anne, without all of the wealth builders sharing their stories, and without Maxine. And for that, I'm truly grateful, and thank you all.